Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. Of course, it's that time once again where we look at the World Cup Unlimited Transfer Drafts. I've made a couple of changes that I wanted to showcase with you and discussed in today's video. There's not too much tinkering that I've done, but I've had a bit of a rethink, had a bit of a reshuffle on certain individuals, and I think really that it's time that we start talking about those individuals really, which is why I'm putting out this video today. So if you're new to the channel and you like what you see, then please do consider subscribing to me. The channel's grown so well over the past few months and I want to continue doing that all the way through to the end of the season for you guys. And of course, if you like the content as well, then smash that like button below. But let's have a look at the first updated draft then. So really the kind of forefront of the conversation I think today is going to be driven by this man Reece James, who's on the thumbnail of this video. Of course, I think bringing him into this draft, I mentioned in the previous video that really Diogo Dalot and Ben White, either one of those with the money I had personally in the bank, could have easily become Reece James. And I think the more and more I think about it, because of the double in 19 and just essentially what he offers this Chelsea squad from that right back position, I just honestly think we can't go without him. I think it's going to be a bit of a risk as well, that being said, just because in between, of course, the City at home fixture and Fulham away fixture, there is another Chelsea game that's being played there. And I think it's actually Manchester City again. So we'll see, you know, the Potter lottery essentially is being thrown around now rather than the Pep roulette, of course. So, you know, it's definitely a risk going for these high reward, high risk players. But I just think the upside is there with him. I think now on review, looking at Manchester United's defence, I really did want to get on board with Dalot or Luke Shaw as a possible wing-back option, just because we know in Erik ten Hag's systems, he loves playing with them really, really far up the pitch. And I think Dalot and Shaw, both of them could do really, really well. The problem I have is it's the defensive point as well. We're really weak at the back in terms of what options we have. We did have a really, really good performance by Casemiro as a makeshift centre-back yesterday against Burnley. And although they're leading the championship, they are still a championship side. They played really well. I won't take anything away from Burnley, but defensively, we still had opportunities go Burnley's way. I think they were unlucky not to score against us yesterday, to be honest. And I think ultimately, you know, the defensive options, we are looking at attacking threat as well, of course, which is why we have the individuals of James and Cancelo. But the clean sheets are still something you need to think about in your defensive line. And I think without Varane, without Martinez, probably for 17 and 18, even if Dalot is 100% fit for that Forest game, I can't really justify having him anymore. So that's why I've gone with Reece James instead. So, you know, that's kind of where my head's at. Like I say, it's definitely a risk-reward pick. Of course, we do have a double up on Chelsea as well. It is worth noting that some individuals or some managers may disagree or think that's maybe a bit too risky, especially from that defensive point of view. But I think you have to look at it in isolation as the two picks separately. I don't think you can just hone in on the double up necessarily. I think we also had that similar situation with Pope and Trippier. We've had maybe even individuals go with the likes of Edison plus Cancelo and so on. I think you pick them for their individual talent or individual reasons. I honestly don't think we necessarily need to hone in on just because it's a double up on Chelsea. It shouldn't be a draft. I think Kepa and Ward are by far the best budget options that we have in these goalkeeping positions. And Reece James is just arguably one of the best right backs, if not the best right back, alongside Trent. So, you know, I've got to put him in the squad, I think ultimately is where my head's at. Then talking about the additional kind of defender headache that I had was, of course, the Arsenal defence. Now, I really wanted to get on board with having them just because I think I've seen them in templates, I've seen them in kind of other people's thinking, and I thought, yeah, no, I really want a piece of that pie. But actually, when I broke down the fixtures, when I was looking at the opportunities of one where I would play them and two where I really think that there's going to be some kind of, you know, positivity coming from the Arsenal defence, it's really hard to justify over the next 6 to 7 weeks. I think with West Ham at home, yes, potentially there could be a clean sheet there, and I think then it gets a little bit tricky. I mean, I know I've highlighted Brighton and Newcastle under Nketiah there as, you know, kind of second to easiest fixture, but they're no mugs when it comes down to attacking output, right? We've seen Brighton score some phenomenal goals. Newcastle are in the top 4 now and must be taken seriously from an attacking point of view, hence why I have Almiron in the squad. So I just feel like over these next 3 weeks especially, I'm not really going to be playing him anyway. who would I play in game week 19 over, let's say, Cancelo or Trippier? Well, I was just having a look at the fixtures, and a team that I think has flown tremendously under the radar is Aston Villa. I think, we need to have a conversation about what Unai Emery can do for this team. I think individually they've got enough talent in the squad to do really, really well this season in terms of, pushing for a potential top half finish in the table, even after that worrying start under Gerrard. And I think that Digne is going to be first choice left wing back for him. We've seen that wonderful free kick against Manchester United that he scored just before the World Cup break. And I think that if he is on set pieces once again with some some direct free kicks as well as corners, I think he's potentially an asset at 4.6 million, which is just 0.1 million cheaper than Ben White, is someone that I think I would like to play ahead of Ben White in those fixtures. So that's where my head's at, and that's why I've made those changes. And then, of course, while we're on the topic of Arsenal, Nketiah is really just... I've kind of done a bit of swapsies, I suppose, really. I had lots of different combinations. I've had Martial in that slot, and then I've had Martinelli in the Rashford slot. I don't necessarily like Rashford and Martinelli as a kind of combination. I much prefer going that little bit extra money into Mason Mount just because of the double on game week 19. And then, of course, it gives me the flexibility to be able to possibly reach a Saka later down the line or someone around of that kind of price point, right? Kulusevski, of course, could emerge. And again, it's that £8 million midfielder that we've kind of spoken about in previous videos, and something that I've got a bit of a soft spot for. So I wanted to make sure that area was at least relatively covered. And then having a double on the kind of 6.6, 6.7, 6 million midfielders, I don't think it's an option for me. So I've looked at combinations of Martinelli and Martial or Rashford, Nketiah. It's really just kind of a coverage pick at this point, to be honest. And I'm not convinced on it. I put it there just so that essentially people can just screenshot it and maybe have a play with their own team. Of course, this is the most expensive squad I've created to date. It is 101.3 million if you was to buy all these players at their purchase price. So, of course, you may find that it's a little bit cheaper than this just because you may have Trippier, you may have Cancelo already, and that value isn't, of course, removed unless you've made the transfer already, sold them, and then you need to buy them back. So, potentially it's a little bit cheaper than 101.3 for some of you, but if you literally had no individuals in this team whatsoever, then it would cost you 101.3, which I think is probably a relatively kind of, it's a reasonable assumption to make that a lot of managers have probably got this available to them to spend by now. So I think, it's an accessible team. But yeah, like I say, those are the changes really. There's only 3 to kind of mention in comparison to the final draft I put out in the previous video. And then, of course, just for the visuals, I have also added Martial instead of Nketiah here, as I think really I'm more than likely going to be leaning towards the Martial pick, just because, once again, when I look at Arsenal's fixtures, yes, they are really high up on the fixture ticker, but I can't help but think a lot of that is down to, of course, the double in 23, which is literally 6 game weeks away. So when you put that into perspective, if I want to get on board with Arsenal and I really think, actually, look, I've made a mistake, it can always be rectified by 1 or 2 transfers. So I've got 6 possible transfers in that timing before the double on in 23, so I can react accordingly. And I'm quite happy going in to game week 17 without their assets, which is why I think in the short term, even with Manchester City and Arsenal coming up for United in, I think it's 20 and 21, I still think that Martial potentially could give us something, especially ahead of the January transfer window. Even if Manchester United go and buy, of course, Gakpo, who impressed in the World Cup, he won't necessarily come straight into the fold. Martial really, yes, he's a minutes risk still. Maybe Rashford slots into that number 9 role, but again, it's someone at that price point I'm happy to kind of take a little bit of a short-term punt on, and potentially even keep him for longer term if he starts to impress. It is worth noting he has scored 2 goals and 2 assists so far in, I think, 5 Premier League games. So he's definitely capable. And again, these fixtures are pretty much as best as it gets, especially with Nottingham Forest that won't have their number 1 choice keeper in Dean Henderson, of course, as he's a loanee from Manchester United. So now I've got this on screen. Of course, Martial is a couple of 0.1 millions more expensive, so it's actually at 101.5 now in terms of the value of this squad. I've got a little bit of money in the bank still to play around with, even after creating this draft, and I think really this is the most confident I've been so far in terms of the drafts I've made And yeah, I would love to know your thoughts below. Like, what's your opinion on no Arsenal? Do you think that's too risky? Are you in a kind of, you know, a more difficult position than me in that, and you just feel like it's too risky to not have one of their assets? On my personal view is that game week 17 is going to be a bit of a bumpy ride for me, just because I think against West Ham, Arsenal could do something. But I think post game week 17, Arsenal's fixtures really don't turn that great. So before I wrap up the video, what I'll do is again, we'll just talk about the individuals I've chosen. Well, mainly I would say let's talk about Villa and Arsenal, really, just because they're the two kind of standout maybe picks or options that we've been talking about in today's video. So we'll go into the fantasy page, and I just first of all want to talk about Aston Villa's fixtures again. So when you look at this run here, of course they do have a bit of a block in 23 and 24. They're against City, Arsenal, maybe even Leicester at home could be potentially tricky in 22, where you probably wouldn't play Digne. But in 19, 20 and 21, Wolves, Leeds and Southampton, I think, are phenomenal fixtures for them. 2 home games against Wolves and Leeds. So we've got a bit of a West Midlands derby in against Wolves at home. And then, of course, Leeds is always a bit of a spicy fixture between these two teams. But I honestly think, again, because of his threat and his essential set piece availability, let's say, and delivery, because when he played for Everton, we all know what he was doing for Calvert-Lewin back then, and I think, to be honest, he could do the same for Ollie Watkins and Danny Ings as well. So I think he's a great option, or as a differential pick. He's only 1.5% owned, which again, playing him on those particular weeks could really pay dividends for the rank over those few weeks. And then I think longer term, because he's only 4.6 million, when we talk about potentially bench boosting, double game weeks that are ahead of us, of course, in the future as well. From game week 25, then they've got Everton, Palace, West Ham, Bournemouth in, you know, between 24 and 28. So I think we can justify holding him long term, and I think that we cannot ignore teams that potentially are going to be on the rise. We cannot just go on the first 16 game weeks worth of data, because there are going to be new teams that emerge and new individuals that emerge from those teams. And I'm kind of feeling that just this small punt that's not too risky may reward me just in those few times that I play him. So that's the justification for Digne in the squad. And then, of course, going back to Arsenal as well, if we just have a look at their fixtures, as mentioned, West Ham and Everton in 17 and 22 are really kind of the only 2 fixtures over the next 6 or 7 weeks that I can really see something being done. I think in between them, with Brighton, Newcastle, Tottenham and United between 18 and 21, they are a really tough run of fixtures. You can't write off Brighton anymore. You can't just look at them as a bottom half team. They are definitely a top half table team. They've got a lot of good football being played on the pitch, and that's at the Amex as well. It's worth noting that I think 3 out of their 4 total clean sheets for Brighton have been at home. So, you know, potentially Arsenal don't break through there. Then, of course, you've got Newcastle, which is a top 4 team that they need to they need to kind of prove that, you know, they can beat. Newcastle have been phenomenally good defensively so far, and I think that's going to continue. And then, of course, Spurs, London derby. We all know what happens in those types of games. It's normally score draws, or it's definitely full of goals. So yeah, from an attacking point of view, I can see maybe Tottenham is a good fixture. West Ham potentially is a good fixture as well. Brighton and Newcastle, I'm on the fence with from an attacking point of view and defensive point of view. United, I think there's goals in that as well. We've already seen what Marcus Rashford did to them at Old Trafford. It's only really, as I say, 22 onwards that I would consider that Arsenal really are possibly essential, at least one asset, and I can make the move for them at that point. So I think that if you can also get on board with that over these next 5 weeks, you run the risk, of course, they are top of the league. You run the risk of being a little bit damaged by certain individuals, maybe like Martinelli, who's high owned. Maybe someone does take a punt, or certain managers take a punt on Nketiah and he scores a couple of braces. Maybe Odegaard, of course, is in the mix as well. Saka. There's a lot of people that we can talk about. But I just think there's so many other options across these next 5 weeks that I can kind of take the L on 1 or 2 of those fixtures if it happens on the chance that one of the players I have chosen outscores the likes of those Arsenal assets. And then, of course, from game week 22 onwards, I could potentially get on board with them. So that's really kind of where my thinking, or where my my brain has adjusted, I guess, to my original thinking of like, oh, I need to get on board with the top of the league contenders here. You know, that Arsenal were looking fantastic. They're looking really good. Actually, on paper, the fixtures are a little bit more difficult. And like I say, I think the fixture ticker is maybe confusing people or just throwing people off a little bit just because of that game week 23 double, which is, like I say, it's so far ahead. So that's going to wrap up the video today, guys. I hope you found the content useful. Of course, let me know in the comments below what you think about going with absolutely zero Arsenal assets between now and, let's say, game week 22 or 23. Have you got double ups? Have you got other dilemmas that you want answering? Let me know in the comments. I, of course, try to answer all of the comments in every single video that I produce. And of course, I will have a live stream on Boxing Day. I'm not sure if I'll put out any more content between now and then. So if I don't see you, then have an absolutely fantastic Christmas if you celebrate it. And of course, yeah, we'll see each other on that Boxing Day stream if you join me. But yeah, of course, enjoy your weekend ahead, guys. And yeah, all the best. I will see you in another video soon. Take care. Bye-bye.